Situation: Old Mexico is ripe for conquest. Mission: seize land, resources, and native peoples. Execution: lead 500 well-trained Spanish conquistadors. Administration: in the name of the King of Spain. Command and control: Captain General Hernan Cortes. Welcome to Conquerors. I'm Captain Dale Dye. Nearly 500 years ago, Spanish conquistadors began their conquest of the Americas. The most successful of them all was Hernan Cortes. When Cortes and his men first landed in Mexico in 1519, they carried weapons like this, finely tempered Spanish swords. The people he faced, the Aztecs under Montezuma, were still using relatively primitive weapons like this obsidian blade. Now, obsidian is sharp, but it's very fragile. No match for Spanish steel. Just as importantly, the Aztecs often didn't use their obsidian weapons to kill their enemies. Sometimes they used them to wound or capture an enemy so he could be used as a slave or a human sacrifice. Both sides, Spaniards and Aztecs, thought their weapons would bring them victory. April 1519. The Spanish mission to conquer Mexico is in big trouble. Its leader, Conquistador Hernan Cortes, is facing mutiny from his own troops. They want to end the expedition at Veracruz and return to Cuba, but there's no turning back for Cortes. And he'll make it impossible for any retreat by committing one of the most daring acts in the history of conquest. He burns his own ships. Now, the only option for his soldiers is victory or death. And victory depends on the leadership, diplomacy, audacity, and cunning of one man, Conquistador Hernan Cortes. Cortes was born into a poor family of lesser nobility in the Extremadura region of Spain. He was trained by his father in swordplay and horseback riding. Cortes's formal schooling included the study of law and diplomacy.
He had a bit of university education, and in fact, among the conquistadores, he's probably one of the better educated people.
Cortes knew that he must leave his homeland to seek the fame and fortune he desired. He took his chance alongside other Spaniards sailing to the New World.
Why do people do all of this? Not because they wanted to make a 3-month trip across the Atlantic in very poor conditions, but they want to make wealth.
In 1504, 19-year-old Hernan Cortes landed at Hispaniola, a Spanish colony now known as the Dominican Republic. At age 25, Cortes became a friend of a well-known conquistador named Diego Velázquez de Cuellar. Cortes joined Velázquez in his conquest of Cuba. The natives on the island of Cuba were no match for the Spanish army.
In the early 16th century, the Spaniards were the most effective military force in all of Europe.
By 1511, Cuba was conquered, and Velázquez became its first governor. Those who came with him, including Cortes, were rewarded with land on the island. Soon, Velázquez made Cortes magistrate of Santiago.
He was not a very wealthy man, but one of the most important people on the island of Cuba.
On behalf of the King of Spain, Velázquez sent expeditions from Cuba to Mexico. The first expedition left in 1517. These conquistadors returned with gold, slaves, and stories of barbaric native people who ritually sacrificed humans. A second expedition departed in 1518. When the leader failed to return on time, Velázquez ordered a third expedition to Mexico. Cortes mortgaged everything he owned and volunteered to finance the trip himself. Velázquez, in turn, named him the Captain General. Finally, the great opportunity that had lured Cortes to the New World was his. This was his chance, and he'd gamble everything to make it successful. Cortes's ambitions were fueled by stories of the great Aztec Empire. He felt certain this empire held all the riches of the New World. He'd seize this land and become as rich as a king. He'd be known and respected by Spanish society. Cortes feverishly prepared for his new endeavor, and Velázquez worried that Cortes would not be the lapdog he'd hoped for.
Velázquez hoped to maintain control of that expedition and hoped to be in charge as governor of any new territories that were found. Cortes, from the very beginning, had no intention of respecting Velázquez as governor of Cuba.
Of course, to control the expedition, he had to control Cortes, and that turned out to be more difficult than Velázquez imagined. Velázquez sent an official government messenger to let Cortes know he was being relieved of his command. Cortes had the messenger killed. In response, Governor Velázquez ordered local officials in Havana to stop Cortes. But Cortes had become a hell of a recruiter. Every man Velázquez sent to detain Cortes ended up volunteering supplies, cash, and often himself to join the expedition. 18 February 1519. Without official authorization, Cortes set sail from Cuba with 11 ships and over 500 men. He'd sail west toward the island of Cozumel, an established landing for Spanish expeditions. By defying direct orders from Velázquez, Cortes took the fate of the expedition into his own hands. But his difficulties seemed to give him a sudden faith, a certainty that he was destined to succeed.
Cortes was a man unlike any other. When he was faced with a problem, he developed a series of strange capacities, first as a man of war, then as a statesman.
He developed strange capacities. In other words, he rose to the occasion. And that, folks, is what conquerors do. Cortes would have to adapt and overcome. He'd have to rely on unknown and untested allies. He'd have to develop a savagery comparable to this untamed land. And he would have to take on a more mythic foe than any conquistador had ever faced. Born around 1466, Montezuma became emperor of the Aztecs in 1502. Descended from royalty, Montezuma inspired his people through fear rather than affection. His people worshipped him as a deity, and common citizens were not allowed to look directly into his eyes. Cortes had set his sights on Mexico, but to conquer Mexico, he would have to conquer Montezuma.